What if I told you that a few small fixes to Opportunity Zone legislation could unlock billions of dollars in small business investment? Today's episode is all about what's broken and what's fixable in the OZ program when it comes to the ability to invest in operating businesses. If Congress gets this right, Opportunity Zones 2.0 could totally revolutionize business investing and finally become the tool they were meant to be, not just for real estate, but for entrepreneurs, for job creation, and for long-term growth in the communities that need it most. Welcome to the Opportunity Zones podcast. I'm Jimmy Atkinson, and joining me on the show today is Jonathan Goldstein. He is the managing director at Advantage Capital. Jonathan, great to see you. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Jimmy, great to be here. I'm great, and I'm excited because Opportunity Zone's got the wind at its back right now, and it's very exciting to see.
It does indeed. We're recording this at a very timely period during this crucial moment in Opportunity Zone's history. We're recording this toward the end of May 2025, and where we are right now is the House has just passed their version of the budget reconciliation bill. Congress is in a recess right now, and the Senate returns next week to pick up the bill. The House bill has some OZ 2.0 language in it. I think the Senate might make a lot of amendments to that language, but we are on our way to getting some Opportunity Zone legislation to renew and extend the program, and we'll be talking about that throughout the course of this show today, including some tweaks that would be helpful to make to the existing statute, which could really open up OZ policy for much more small business investment. But before we get into the weeds on those topics, Jonathan, I want to back up for just a minute and tell me a little bit more about yourself and your firm, Advantage Capital, because you're doing something that not a lot of Opportunity Zone operators are engaged in. You're engaged in small business investment, which I think is incredible. So could you tell me a little bit more about your firm and what differentiates you?
Yeah, no, thanks, Jimmy. I'm happy to. We are about a 34-year-old firm. We call ourselves an impact investor. We are diversified across asset classes like renewable energy and affordable housing, but we were founded and remain core. What remains core to our practice is small business investing in underserved communities, particularly rural communities around the country, in service of job creation, building economic activity in those communities. And I think those are themes that really underlie a lot of why Opportunity Zones came about in the first place. Our results to date, I think, speak for themselves. We've invested in that period in over 1,000 companies. We've invested over $4.5 billion towards producing those jobs. The results collectively, 77,000 permanent jobs and counting. And maybe what we're most proud of is the wages in those businesses in underserved communities. Our businesses average $59,000 a year in wages. Those are phenomenal numbers. They are roughly 1.4, 1.5 times living wage if you look at it on average across the entire portfolio. So, that's really who we are, and we would love to use a tool like Opportunity Zone in support of that. Unfortunately, we're going to talk about that here today. The current structure without these tweaks makes that a little more challenging.
Yeah, for sure it does. That is incredible. Your track record, over $4.5 billion, billion with a B, dollars invested in small businesses over the past 30 plus years. And I think you said 77,000 jobs created. Those are some incredible numbers. And it'd be great to have your expertise and that track record brought even more so into the Opportunity Zone arena so you can make more Opportunity Zone investments. But there are a couple things that are hindering the Opportunity Zone policy in terms of small business investment, which we'll talk about in more detail in a few minutes. But a couple things you mentioned in your opening there. One is rural. I want to talk about rural with you in a minute too. But I want to tell people how we first met was at a Senator Tim Scott hosted event in Washington, D.C. earlier this month, early May 2025. I still have the flyer for it here, actually. Opportunity Zone Policy Summit, Thursday, May 8th. That was an incredible event. Senator Tim Scott headlined the event. It was put on by his organization, Great Opportunity Policy. And he had Senator Mike Crapo at one point join him up on stage, and it was a star-studded guest list. Jonathan, I wanted to get a sense from you. What were some of your biggest takeaways from that event? What did you enjoy about it?
Oh, it was extraordinary. I mean, the support in that room. So you mentioned Senator Crapo. Obviously, Senator Scott might be considered the father of Opportunity Zone. You also had Secretary Turner from HUD, taking time out of his day to come and talk about how important a tool Opportunity Zone had become for his world, for the world of affordable housing and workforce housing. Um, Secretary Bessent was scheduled to be there. He put it on his schedule. He has a few other priorities, and I think he was called to Europe, but sent not one, but a couple of different delegates in his place, including Deputy Assistant Secretary Alexandria Smith, who spoke very eloquently about the value of opportunity zones. Kevin Hassett came. I mean, and he should be there. He was one of the forefathers of Opportunity Zone. I think he was one of the authors of a white paper that originally led to opportunity zones in the first place, and on and on. So it was an extraordinary group of people. And to me, it was a signal, and I think appropriately so, that we've really hit on something here. We've hit on a really strong policy for mobilizing capital into these underserved communities and really generating economic activity that can lift all boats, if you will. So I was
Yeah.
really, really pleased by that.
It was great. It was great to see the support that Senator Scott and Senator Crapo shared for opportunity zone policy. But yeah, as you mentioned, two cabinet level members, Secretary Scott Turner from HUD, Secretary Scott Bessent, who unfortunately got called away last minute, but sent some delegates from his office. Incredible amount of support in the administration and in Congress for opportunity zones. And you were one of the speakers at the event, also, Jonathan. That's how
I
we
was.
became acquainted with each other. Was immediately after that event. You mentioned Director Kevin Hassett, chief economist in the White House, and he wrote or co-authored that original white paper on opportunity zones with the Economic Innovation Group back in, I think it was 2014 or 2015, a couple years before opportunity zones were enacted as part of Trump's Tax Cuts and Jobs Act during his first term. But that white paper was actually written while President Obama was still in the White House. So the opportunity zones predate Trump by a couple years, even the ideation at least. But let's move on now. Support for the program aside, one of the big drivers for a lot of politics right now, particularly in terms of economic development and particularly in terms of opportunity zones, is how can we incentivize more rural investment? There's special language in this House version of this OZ 2.0 bill as a small part of the much larger One Big Beautiful Bill Act that provides new incentives for rural investment in rural opportunity zones. What's been your experience with rural investment so far? What's your take on rural?
Well, first I'll talk about advantages focus in rural. I mean, of that list of investments we talked about, over 170 of those were in rural businesses. We're talking about almost $1 billion invested in those rural businesses. We've created almost 17,000 permanent jobs in those rural communities. And one of the things that I'm most proud of, particularly in rural communities, is our ability, as often the first institutional investor in those businesses, to then attract and help them attract follow-on investment. And so our $900 million of rural investment has directly resulted in another 1.3 billion in follow-on investments from other investors, largely institutional. And so that's really what we've come to realize is our greatest value, is paving the way for other institutional capital to follow us, which is how those businesses can really grow and really start to supercharge their employment, which is absolutely critical for their communities. So we're very committed to rural investing, and we'd love to see opportunity zones itself reshape just slightly to make that easier in terms of job production in those communities.
Yeah, and I think that's been a clear focal point of the House bill to enhance opportunity zones is to provide some additional rural incentives. I don't know what's going to happen in the Senate version of the bill, but I would imagine that there's a very good chance that some of those additional incentives for rural investment remain in. Time will tell. We'll find out in the next few weeks here, hopefully. As I mentioned, we're recording this episode toward the end of May 2025. I would imagine it's going to be released early to mid June of 2025. So before too long, hopefully we'll get some Senate version of the bill, maybe toward the middle, toward the end of June. So we'll find out soon enough. Now let's get to the matter at hand here, specifically all of the expertise and experience that you and your group, Advantage Capital, have in small business investing, and how you'd like to make more small business investments, specifically under the Opportunity Zone tax incentive policy. But there's a couple of issues with how the statute is written that's really hindered a lot of small business investing to date. I've heard estimates that at least 75%, maybe even 90% or more. It's hard to pin it down exactly, but some order somewhere in that ballpark of all Opportunity Zone capital has gone toward real estate investment. And the real estate investment's been great. It's been highly impactful. It's helped to create a lot of jobs. It's helped create a lot of housing in this country. Over 300,000 new housing units that would not have otherwise been built have been delivered. So this is not a knock on real estate investing whatsoever. But if you rewind back to some conversations and some of those white papers that were written in the early years of Opportunity Zones, a lot of the language, a lot of the policy goals of Opportunity Zone investing was to catalyze entrepreneurship and to catalyze small business development within Opportunity Zones. And we really haven't seen a lot of that. Jonathan, why do you think that is? And what particularly is wrong or maybe suboptimal with the statute as currently written when it comes to making it suitable for investing in small businesses?
Well, it's a great question, and I want to really drill down on that. But let me first support some of the statistics that you just cited, Jimmy. In addition to that statistic about how much real estate investing has gone in OZ, I think that Novogradac has a firm that you and I both know, an accounting firm that really has tried to enable OZ throughout the country. To the best of their knowledge, only 2%, less than 2%, has gone into operating businesses, and that's just a staggering number. And I think when we talk about the changes that I'm going to suggest, I also just want to remind everybody, businesses are smaller, sort of structurally smaller in rural communities. And so if we can open up this statute and really make it more flexible for these smaller, shorter duration investments, we're not only going to help job production overall, but I think we're going to have an outsized impact on rural investing. And as you know, rural investing has lagged a little bit in terms of versus urban investing in Opportunity Zone. I think the statistic I've seen is that 8% of Opportunity Zone capital has gone into rural businesses, as opposed to about 23% of overall Opportunity Zones being rural. So that's a mismatch that I think really speaks to this structural issue that we're talking about, as well as the incentives that Chairman Smith included in the House draft. So to answer your question, we really think there's only two changes that would be really core to redirecting Opportunity Zone, allowing it to continue to work, obviously, in all the ways that it's working today, but also allowing it to be used for the kind of small business or Main Street investments that firms like Advantage do. One has to do with the duration of the investment required to get what we think of as the most significant benefit in Opportunity Zones. And the second has to do with what is required to qualify as a business for an Opportunity Zone investment. I'm happy to dive into either of those, however you'd like to handle it.
Yeah, let's tackle them one at a time. So the first one involves the duration of the investment. Currently, the way that the statute and the regulations are written, an investor is required to hold their QOF investment for 10 or more years in order to achieve the full tax benefit of the program, in order to specifically avoid capital gains tax on any appreciation of the QOF investment.
That's
Now,
right.
at the QOF level, you would think that a QOF, and when I use that term, I'm talking about qualified opportunity fund for anybody new to this program or new to the show. You'd think that the Opportunity Zone fund or the qualified opportunity fund would be able to use that capital however they wish, as long as they're purchasing qualifying Opportunity Zone property or qualifying Opportunity Zone businesses. If they could sell them maybe after 3 or 4 or 5 years and then recycle that cash into a new OZ property or new OZ business, that would be fine. But in fact, what that does is it creates some very adverse tax consequences for the investor. And this issue is referred to in the industry as interim gains. So interim gains is a huge hole in the statute as currently written. There's no relief for interim gains if a sale of any QOF property, including opportunity zone property or opportunity zone businesses, gets triggered before that 10-year hold period. It blows up the investor's 10-year clock, and it also creates an interim gain that can't be deferred. Is that right? And how would you address that issue specifically? What are your recommendations to Congress?
Well, you've nailed it, Jimmy, and you're so articulate in describing this. For completeness, for those that may not be as deeply embedded in this as you are, there are two other benefits from Opportunity Zone. There is the immediate deferral of your original gains that you invest, and then there is some forgiveness of those gains after a period of time. Those are great benefits, but you are exactly right. For most investors, the biggest win comes if you make a successful investment in a QOF, which in turn is investing in opportunity zones, and you hold that investment for 10 plus years, then you get the forgiveness of any of that new gain. And so just for illustration purposes, let's imagine that you invest $1 million in a QOF and it makes a single investment. And let's say that that investment doubles over 10 years, reasonable expectation. That new $1 million of gain that you'd reap after 10 years would be tax-free. That's part of the incentive that Opportunity Zone sets up to encourage investors to move capital into these communities. And we think it's a brilliant policy. Now take a separate example. Imagine that you invest your $1 million in a QOF, they invest in a business, they then harvest that investment after 5 years, which is a very typical duration for an investment in a Main Street business. After 5 years, let's say they harvest that investment at a $500,000 benefit. So they've gotten 50% instead of 100% gain at that point. And then they reinvest in a second business. They reinvest that money and they get another $500,000 in gain that they harvest at the end of 10 years. Unlike the first scenario where all $1 million has been sheltered, under this second scenario, that first $500,000 of gain, that rolls right back up to the investor and they have to pay capital gains on that, even though the QOF kept the money invested exactly as we as policymakers would want. They kept the money invested in opportunity zones. Now the investor doesn't see that gain. And that's really a critical issue as we see it for investing in small businesses, manufacturers, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I am about to, and by the time this episode airs, I'm likely to have already sent a letter with some of my stakeholder group's core policy recommendations for improving the Opportunity Zone program, to enhancing it, to making it more suitable, particularly for small business development. And that is one of the big issues. That is one of the big core 5 issues, is this idea of offering interim gains relief would really open up the policy to a lot more small business investment. So that is one big issue with the current statute. And we've explained our recommendations for how to fix that issue. What's this second issue? It deals with how small businesses can qualify as a qualified opportunity zone business and be eligible basically to be treated as a good asset on the balance sheet of a qualified opportunity fund. What does it take currently to qualify as a small business, and what are some issues that you see with those qualification criteria?
Yep, great question. And so, among the qualifiers for a small business are things that we would all expect, right? Number one, it has to be located in an opportunity zone. And while that sounds simple enough, you have to put rules around that because a lot of businesses have multiple locations. So how do we deem it to be located? We don't take issue with any of that. We think those rules have been set up very well. A second one is you can't park the cash in the business. You can't put the money in the business and let it sit on it for 10 years while you get the benefit of that 10-year upside. That's called, it refers to the rules of non-qualified financial property. So the capital has to be used in the business. Again, we have no issue with that. There is a third qualifier that we are focused on, however, and it has to do with how the hard assets of that business were acquired. And I'll describe this as sort of a good assets, bad assets test, where the statute sort of sets up this framework that says there are types of assets or ways that you acquired assets that makes them bad assets. If you acquired them too long ago, before 2017, they are bad assets. If you acquired them from an affiliate, they're bad assets. If you were not the first user of those assets in the opportunity zone, they're bad assets. And the reason that this is a problem is that the statute goes on then to say only 30% of that business's assets can be bad assets. Well, that could mean as significant an investment as you might have to buy new assets that result in 70% of your asset base in order to qualify for an opportunity zone investment. In other words, you may have to more than triple your total asset base in order to avail yourself of this capital. And we just don't think that asset test makes sense when it comes to investing in a small manufacturer in a rural business. Maybe they're going to use some of our capital for that, for new equipment, but in all likelihood, they're going to use some of it for hiring. They're going to use some of it for marketing. They're going to use some of it for maybe research and development, new product development, that sort of thing. Those are all very viable uses for the businesses, and we'd rather see the statute trust them to use it in the way that is going to most accelerate their growth, because that's the best way to get to those new jobs. So we'd love to see some adjustments in that test.
Well, let me just provide a specific example with specific numbers. This example is adapted from an example that's cited in the Novogradac Opportunity Zone Working Group's letter to the Trump administration that they sent to the Trump administration in January of 2025. And it goes something like this: an existing business in an opportunity zone has a lot of trouble qualifying. Let's say, for example, an existing business has $3 million worth of tangible assets that they acquired prior to the enactment of the opportunity zone statute. So prior to the end of 2017, essentially, right? Pretty common example.
We see it all the time.
Right? Okay, so that $3 million worth of tangible property that they have on their books when they want to start raising OZ equity for additional investments in the business, what would they have to do? In order to satisfy the 70% investment standard, where 70% of their tangible assets are good OZ assets, that $3 million worth of assets that they come in with are all bad. So they have to add $7 million worth of tangible assets in order to qualify. That's just the first hurdle that they have to jump through. Never mind, they have to be located in an opportunity zone, and some other criteria that we might not get into right now. But that seems very burdensome. Yes. Obviously. And did I get that right, by the way? Is that really what they would have to do in order to qualify as a small business under the current statute?
You got it exactly right. I mean, you sort of described, as the letter did, sort of the most extreme case, but any number of variants that we see all the time create that exact problem. And what it results in is it results in the program dictating to the small business how they need to use capital to grow, which I don't think that's necessarily good policy, and frankly may have been a little bit of an oversight in the way that the statute was drafted. The rules that we just described, and you know this, Jimmy, from reading the statute so carefully as you have, the rules that we just described originate in a different section of the statute, a section that focuses on how can a QOF use the investor's capital to purchase assets in an opportunity zone. That's a different qualifying use of investments in opportunity zones. And in that situation, all of these rules about not purchasing from affiliates and not having purchased it too soon and being the first user, and they all make sense. But then when you take those rules and you bring them into how a business that you're going to invest in qualifies, that's where things start to fall apart a little bit. And I think this is one of the key reasons why investors like us haven't been able to make wide scale use of opportunity zones for the style of investing that we're talking about.
So what would you recommend specifically pertaining to the 70% investment standard that qualified opportunity zone businesses are held to? How would you like to see that change in order to better incentivize small business investments?
That is a great question. And first, I just want to acknowledge what Chairman Smith and the House did on this topic. They took this head on. They focused their addressing this issue in the rural context, but they very clearly lowered that 70% bar significantly when it comes to rural businesses and how much good assets versus bad assets they need in rural businesses. So I found that to be very reinforcing that they see the issue and they're trying to address the issue. We take a slightly more provocative stance, quite frankly, and we say, why do we need an asset test? Why is that there in the first place? Let's make sure that the capital is being put to use in the business. We already know the business is located in the opportunity zone. That was a qualifier. We already know they can't sit on the capital. Our proposal is let's add another requirement. Let's make sure that there's no money in, money out. We don't want to allow investors to put money into these businesses and then take it back out to an affiliate, which would clearly be an abuse. But other than that, as long as the capital is staying in the business and being put to use, why do we care if they're using it for working capital, for hiring, for purchasing inventory, for research and development? Let's let the business make that decision. Let's trust the business owner to put that capital to use in the most effective way, where everybody's interests are aligned. So we would say push the asset test aside and come up with a more streamlined qualifier when you're talking about investing in operating businesses.
It'd definitely make it a lot easier to qualify as an OZ business, which I think is what we want in order to be able to allocate more capital to small business investments within opportunity zones. Are there any other issues when it comes to qualification as an OZ business that you'd like to see addressed, or did we cover them all?
Those really are the two major ones. Look, we're trying to deliver a very narrow message that just with these minor tweaks, we think that this program could explode in its opportunity zone investment uses. We think there's a lot of investors out there for whom small business and manufacturing, that's their wheelhouse. And we think that they would pick this program up and just really run hard at it to the benefit of these opportunity zone businesses, particularly rural businesses.
Absolutely. Well, I'm all for it. I'm all for tweaking the statute any way that we can, any way that the Senate can, hopefully, in order to drive more capital investment into opportunity zone investments over a long period of time, maybe even making it a permanent part of the tax code. We're all going to find out in the coming weeks here. We're getting very close to having a final version of this One Big Beautiful Bill Act that will substantially enhance opportunity zones and introduce an opportunity zones 2.0 program, hopefully sooner rather than later. Jonathan, it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. Really appreciate your time and your thoughts on OZs and in particular on small business investment within opportunity zones. If anyone in our audience of viewers or listeners is interested in learning more about you and Advantage Capital, where can they go to learn more?
We have a great website, Jimmy. We are www.advantagecap.com. You can see there not only our track record in small business investing, but as I mentioned, the other impact fields like affordable housing, like solar and renewable energy investing. I can be reached at jgoldstein@advantagecap.com. I'd love any feedback or questions. We have used opportunity zones to a small degree. We're excited to do more with it. And we think with these tweaks, we could really add our voice to many others in terms of the value of what was really a well-designed program.
Absolutely. Well, for my viewers and listeners out there today, if you enjoyed today's episode, hit that like button, give us a thumbs up. We're going to have show notes available on our website, as we always do, at opportunityzones.com/podcast. If you want to read more about today's show. Also, please be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube or your favorite podcast listening platform to always get the latest episodes. Jonathan, thanks again for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, Jimmy, really fun to talk with you. Your knowledge is really deep and wide on this subject. And so the conversation was really interesting.
Thank you.